The moment Ted Cruz pointed his finger at Jasmine Crockett and said, "Go back to Texas," the entire Senate chamber went dead silent. What happened next left Cruz completely speechless and may have just ended his political career forever. The 43-year-old Texas Democrat was about to deliver the most savage comeback in Senate history, and it was all caught on live television. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the latest political drama. Trust me, you won't want to miss what Jasmine Crockett did next. Senator Jasmine Crockett stood at the Senate podium, her red blazer sharp against the mahogany backdrop. The lights were blazing, C-SPAN cameras rolling as she prepared to address the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. What she didn't know was that Ted Cruz had been waiting for this moment, planning an attack that would backfire in the most spectacular way possible. Cruz sat 3 seats down, his signature smirk already forming as he shuffled through his notes. He'd spent weeks preparing what he thought would be the perfect takedown of the rising Democratic star. The Texas senator was confident this would be easy. After all, he was the Harvard-educated debater who'd argued before the Supreme Court. How hard could it be to embarrass a first-term Democrat? But Cruz was about to learn the hardest lesson of his political life. The chamber buzzed with tension as Crockett began her opening statement about renewable energy investments in Texas. Little did anyone know Cruz was about to turn this routine hearing into the political fight of the century. To understand what happened next, you need to know exactly who these two senators are and why this confrontation was inevitable. Jasmine Crockett represents everything Ted Cruz fears about the future of Texas politics. At 43, she's a powerhouse attorney who spent years fighting for civil rights in Dallas courtrooms before winning her Senate seat in a stunning upset. She grew up in a working-class family in South Dallas, worked her way through law school, and built her career defending the underdog against powerful interests. Crockett's rise has been meteoric. In just 2 years in the Senate, she's become the voice of a new generation of Texas Democrats. Younger, more diverse, and absolutely fearless when it comes to calling out Republican hypocrisy. Her viral moments questioning corporate executives and GOP senators have made her a social media sensation and a rising star in the Democratic Party. She's not just another politician. She's a force of nature who refuses to be intimidated. Then there's Ted Cruz, the 54-year-old Republican who's been in the Senate since 2013. Cruz built his reputation as a constitutional lawyer and conservative firebrand. But his political career has been marked by controversy after controversy. From his role in the January 6th Capitol riots to his infamous Cancun trip during the Texas freeze, Cruz has become one of the most polarizing figures in American politics. But here's what makes this confrontation so explosive. Both senators represent Texas, but they couldn't be more different. Cruz represents the old guard, privileged, Ivy League educated, and increasingly out of touch with modern Texas. Crockett represents the new Texas, diverse, progressive, and ready to fight for working families. The stakes couldn't be higher. With Texas slowly turning purple, this battle isn't just about two senators. It's about the future of American politics. And today, that future was about to be decided in the most dramatic way possible. The committee hearing had been routine until Crockett started talking about environmental justice in minority communities. Her voice was steady, her facts were solid, and her passion was undeniable. But as she spoke about the disproportionate impact of pollution on communities of color, Cruz's face grew darker. He'd been planning this attack for weeks, and now was his chance to strike. What started as a routine committee hearing was about to explode into political warfare. Cruz had been waiting for his moment, and as Crockett wrapped up her opening statement, he made his move. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman," Cruz interrupted, his voice cutting through the chamber like a knife. The committee chair looked annoyed but recognized the Texas Republican. The chair recognizes Senator Cruz. Cruz stood slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked on Crockett. "Mr. Chairman, I find it interesting that the junior senator from Texas wants to lecture us about environmental justice when her own district has some of the worst air quality in the state." The camera caught Crockett's reaction. A slight smile that anyone who knew her recognized as dangerous. She dealt with bullies like Cruz her entire career, and she wasn't about to back down now. If the senator from Texas has a question, I'm happy to answer it, Crockett replied coolly. That's when Cruz made his first mistake. He stepped closer to the microphone, his voice rising with that condescending tone that had made him famous and hated across America. Senator Crockett, you've been in Washington for exactly 2 years, and you think you understand Texas better than someone who's been fighting for our state for over a decade. Your radical environmental agenda would destroy thousands of oil and gas jobs. Maybe you should spend less time grandstanding on social media and more time actually representing Texans. The Republican side of the committee room erupted in quiet chuckles. Democratic staffers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Crockett? She just smiled wider. The tension in the room was electric. Democratic senators were sitting forward in their chairs. Republican senators were exchanging glances. The C-SPAN cameras captured every moment as Cruz prepared to deliver what he thought would be the killing blow. You could feel something building in the air. The kind of moment that changes everything. Cruz thought he had her cornered, thought he could steamroll another Democratic opponent with his usual tactics. But he was about to discover that Jasmine Crockett wasn't like any opponent he'd faced before. She was about to show him exactly what happens when you mess with someone who's been underestimated their entire life. I appreciate the senator's concern about my social media presence, Crockett began, her voice dripping with honey-coated sarcasm. But I'm curious, is this the same senator who liked a pornographic video on Twitter on September 11th? Because if we're talking about social media responsibility, the room went dead silent. Cruz's face flushed red as several committee members tried to hide their smirks. The pornography incident from 2017 had been a massive embarrassment for Cruz, and Crockett had just brought it up in front of live cameras. But Cruz wasn't done. If anything, he was just getting started. His next attack would be the one that changed everything. Senator Crockett, Cruz said, his voice now sharp with anger. You can deflect all you want, but the people of Texas see through your radical agenda. You don't represent Texas values. You represent everything that's wrong with the modern Democratic Party. Divisive, angry, and completely out of touch with real Americans. The tension in the room was electric. Democratic senators were sitting forward in their chairs. Republican senators were exchanging glances. The C-SPAN cameras captured every moment as Cruz prepared to deliver what he thought would be the killing blow. If you hate Texas energy policy so much, Cruz continued, pointing directly at Crockett, maybe you should go back to Texas and actually talk to the workers whose jobs you want to eliminate. That's when it happened. The phrase that would haunt Cruz for the rest of his political career. Go back to Texas. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. Everyone understood the racial undertones. And everyone watched as Jasmine Crockett's expression changed from amused to absolutely furious. The committee chair tried to restore order, but it was too late. Cruz had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And Jasmine Crockett was about to make him pay for it in the most devastating way possible. She stood up slowly, her hands gripping the podium. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely lethal. Excuse me, Senator Cruz, did you just tell me to go back somewhere? The room held its breath. Cruz realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late to take it back. He'd used the classic racist dog whistle and everyone knew it. That's not what I meant. Cruz started to backtrack. Oh, I think we all heard exactly what you meant, Crockett interrupted. And I think it's time someone finally told you exactly what Texas thinks about Ted Cruz. What happened next would become the most viral political moment of the year. This was the moment Jasmine Crockett had been preparing for her entire life. Every courtroom battle, every civil rights case, every time she'd been underestimated because of her race or gender, it all led to this. She stepped away from the podium and looked directly into Cruz's eyes. Senator Cruz, you just told a black woman senator to go back somewhere. Let me tell you something about going back. The silence in the room was deafening. Cruz tried to interrupt, but Crockett held up her hand. I was born in Dallas, Texas. My family has been in Texas for 4 generations. My great-grandfather worked the oil fields that made the state rich. So when you tell me to go back to Texas, I'm already home. But since you brought up going back, let's talk about that. You want to know who should go back somewhere? How about you go back to Canada where you were born? How about you go back to that Cancun resort while Texans were freezing to death? The Democratic side of the committee room erupted. Even some Republican staffers were trying not to smile. Cruz's face had gone from red to purple, and his hands were visibly shaking. But Crockett wasn't finished. Not even close. You want to talk about representing Texas values? Let me tell you what Texas values really are. Texas values are about standing up for your neighbors when they're in trouble, not flying to Mexico for vacation. Texas values are about fighting for working families, not just the oil executives who fund your campaigns. She pulled out her phone and held it up to the microphone. And since you mentioned social media, let me read you something. This is from your own Twitter account posted just last month. The room leaned forward as Crockett began reading. Proud to stand with Texas energy workers against the radical left's job-killing agenda. Posted from Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. While Texas refineries were laying off hundreds of workers due to your failed energy policies. The gasps around the room were audible. Cruz had posted that tweet while on another vacation, completely oblivious to the irony. But here's my favorite part, Crockett continued, her voice rising with righteous anger. You want to lecture me about Texas values? I've been fighting for Texas families in courtrooms while you were arguing with Big Bird on Twitter. I've been defending workers' rights while you were writing books about how much you hate Washington from your Washington office. The committee chair was banging his gavel, but nobody was paying attention. This was political theater at its finest, and everyone knew they were watching history. Cruz finally found his voice. Senator Crockett, this is completely inappropriate. You know what's inappropriate? Crockett shot back. What's inappropriate is a senator who's more famous for his Twitter feuds than his legislation. What's inappropriate is telling a black woman to go back somewhere in 2025. What's inappropriate is abandoning your constituents every time they need you most. She paused, letting the words sink in, then delivered the knockout punch. Senator Cruz, you've been in the Senate for 12 years, and your biggest accomplishment is becoming a meme. I've been here for 2 years, and I've already passed more meaningful legislation for Texas families than you have in over a decade. So if anyone needs to go back somewhere, maybe you should go back to whatever law firm will still hire you after this disaster of a Senate career. The room exploded. Democrats were on their feet applauding. Republican senators were staring at their phones, probably calculating how far they could distance themselves from Cruz. And Cruz himself was sitting there like a deer in headlights, completely destroyed by a senator half his age. But Crockett had one more bomb to drop. And since we're talking about going back, she said with a smile that could cut glass, maybe you should go back to that debate prep session where you got humiliated by Beto O'Rourke, because clearly you didn't learn anything from that embarrassment either. Cruz tried one last desperate comeback. Senator Crockett, your disrespect for this institution. Disrespect for this institution? Crockett laughed. Senator, you tried to overturn a presidential election. You incited a riot at the Capitol. You've turned the Senate into your personal Twitter feed. And you want to lecture me about respect. The committee chair finally managed to restore order, but the damage was done. Ted Cruz had walked into that hearing thinking he would destroy Jasmine Crockett's career. Instead, she had just ended his. As the cameras captured Cruz slumping in his chair, defeated and humiliated, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a political victory. This was a changing of the guard. The old Texas was dead, and Jasmine Crockett had just buried it. Within minutes of the hearing ending, the political world exploded. The clip of Crockett destroying Cruz was uploaded to Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, and every other social media platform imaginable. Hashtag Crockett vs. Cruz began trending nationwide before the senators had even left the building. The reactions were immediate and brutal for Cruz. Democratic accounts shared the video with captions like, Jasmine Crockett just ended Ted Cruz's entire career in 5 minutes. And, this is what happens when you underestimate a civil rights lawyer from Dallas. Conservative media tried to spin it as an attack on Texas values, but even Republican voters weren't buying it. Comment sections filled with Texas Republicans. filled with Texas Republicans saying things like, "I voted for Cruz, but she's right," and "maybe it's time for new leadership." The most devastating reaction came from Cruz's own staff. Within hours, 3 senior advisors had quietly updated their LinkedIn profiles, clearly preparing to jump ship from what they knew was a sinking political career. Sources inside Cruz's office revealed that his communications team had been in full damage control mode, frantically calling conservative media outlets to try to spin the story in his favor. But even Fox News hosts were struggling to defend the indefensible. One particularly brutal moment came when Cruz's longtime chief of staff was caught on a hot mic telling a colleague, "I can't keep defending this guy. He's making us all look like idiots." The audio quickly leaked to political reporters, adding another layer of humiliation to Cruz's growing pile of embarrassments. The international diplomatic community was also buzzing about the confrontation. Foreign ambassadors stationed in Washington had watched the exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. Several European diplomats were privately telling their home governments that Cruz's behavior represented everything wrong with American political discourse. But the real story was playing out in Texas itself. Local news stations across the state were running the clip on loop. Radio shows were taking calls from listeners, and the response was overwhelmingly in favor of Crockett. Even in deep red rural counties, voters were saying Cruz had gone too far. The Texas Tribune conducted an emergency poll that showed stunning results. 67% of Texas voters believed Cruz had crossed a line with his "go back" comment, including 43% of Republican voters. More shocking still, 58% of Texans said they would prefer Crockett to represent them in the Senate, despite many disagreeing with her political positions. "She made him look like a fool," said one Republican voter from Amarillo. "I don't agree with her politics, but she's right about Cruz. He's embarrassing." The Republican Party of Texas issued a weak statement supporting Cruz, but behind the scenes, party officials were panicking. They knew Cruz had always been unpopular, but this level of humiliation could cost them the Senate seat in 2026. Meanwhile, Crockett's phone was ringing off the hook. Democratic donors were calling to pledge support for her presidential ambitions. Late-night talk show hosts were begging her to appear. Magazine editors wanted her on their covers. The transformation was immediate. In the span of one hearing, Jasmine Crockett had gone from rising star to national phenomenon, and Ted Cruz had gone from controversial senator to political punchline. But the story gets even better. Within 24 hours, investigative journalists had dug up the receipts on every claim Crockett had made. The Cabo San Lucas tweet was real. The voting record was accurate. Even the comparison to his debate performance against Beto O'Rourke was backed up by polling data showing Cruz's approval ratings had never recovered. The Dallas Morning News ran a scathing editorial titled, "Jasmine Crockett shows us what real Texas leadership looks like." The Houston Chronicle published an op-ed calling for Cruz to resign. Even the conservative Texas Tribune admitted that Crockett had scored decisive points in the exchange. Fox News tried to defend Cruz, but their heart wasn't in it. Tucker Carlson's segment about the confrontation spent more time playing Crockett's highlights than defending Cruz. Sean Hannity called it a partisan attack, but even his audience seemed more impressed with Crockett's performance than outraged by her tactics. The memes were brutal and hilarious. One showed Cruz's face photoshopped onto a crying baby with the caption, "When you mess with Texas and Texas messes back." Another showed Crockett as a superhero with the text, "Defending Texas from fake Texans since 2023. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from other Republican senators. Privately, many admitted they were relieved that someone had finally called out Cruz's behavior. "He's been an embarrassment for years," one GOP senator told Politico on condition of anonymity. "Maybe this will finally wake him up." The political implications were enormous, and everyone knew this was just the beginning. Crockett's performance had instantly made her a top contender for the 2028 Democratic presidential nomination. Her fundraising numbers exploded, with small-dollar donations pouring in from across the country. Political analysts began speculating about her future, with many predicting she could become the first black woman president. For Cruz, the damage was catastrophic. His approval ratings, already underwater, plummeted to historic lows. Republican primary challengers began eyeing his Senate seat. Donors started returning his calls less frequently. But the real impact was on the broader political landscape. Crockett's takedown of Cruz had shown Democrats how to fight back against Republican bullying tactics. Her combination of facts, passion, and righteous anger became the template for political confrontations going forward. Within a week, Democratic politicians across the country were studying the video, learning from Crockett's technique. The days of taking Republican attacks lying down were over. The Jasmine Crockett era of Democratic politics had begun. Late-night comedians had a field day with the material. Stephen Colbert's monologue about the incident became his most-watched segment of the year. Ted Cruz told a black woman senator to go back somewhere, Colbert said to thunderous applause. And she told him to go back to Canada. Honestly, I don't know who won that exchange. Just kidding, it was obviously Jasmine Crockett by a landslide. Saturday Night Live dedicated an entire sketch to the confrontation, with the actress playing Crockett delivering lines that had the studio audience roaring with laughter. The sketch ended with the Cruz character literally crawling under his desk to hide, which became yet another viral moment. But the real impact was being felt in political circles across Washington. Democratic leadership was scrambling to figure out how to harness Crockett's momentum. Nancy Pelosi called her personally to congratulate her performance. Chuck Schumer invited her to join the Senate Democratic leadership team. Even President Biden mentioned the confrontation in a press briefing, saying, "Senator Crockett showed exactly the kind of leadership we need in Washington." Meanwhile, Republican leadership was dealing with a full-scale crisis. Mitch McConnell was reportedly furious with Cruz for creating such a massive distraction from their legislative agenda. Several Republican senators had privately asked Cruz to consider stepping down from his committee positions to avoid further embarrassment. The confrontation had also sparked a broader conversation about racism in politics. Civil rights organizations praised Crockett for calling out Cruz's dog whistle tactics, while political scientists noted that the exchange represented a new era of politicians refusing to tolerate coded racist language. The legacy of this moment extends far beyond the careers of two senators. It represents a fundamental shift in American politics, from the politics of division and dog whistles to the politics of accountability and truth-telling. The long-term consequences were still unfolding, but one thing was clear. Ted Cruz had made the biggest mistake of his political career. He tried to bully the wrong person, and she'd made him pay for it in front of the entire country. As for what happens next, Cruz still has 3 years left in his Senate term, but his political future looks grim. Crockett, on the other hand, is just getting started. And if this confrontation proved anything, it's that when you come for Jasmine Crockett, you better not miss. This wasn't just a political confrontation. It was a generational changing of the guard. The old boys club had just been put on notice by a new generation of leaders who won't be intimidated, won't be silenced, and definitely won't be told to go back anywhere. Jasmine Crockett didn't just destroy Ted Cruz. She showed the entire country what real leadership looks like in the 21st century. If you enjoyed watching Jasmine Crockett destroy Ted Cruz, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible political moments. Because if this confrontation taught us anything, it's that American politics just got a lot more interesting. What do you think? Did Jasmine Crockett go too far? Or did Ted Cruz get exactly what he deserved? And more importantly, what does this mean for the future of American politics? Let me know in the comments below.